So I'm going to read you a few things that happen around here. They have no continuity to them, but they're kind of interesting. In 1849, here at this church, they have a temperance meeting. What is a temperance meeting? It has nothing to do with temperance. It has to do with abstinence. They want to do away with the evil alcohol.
That was from the Jarnagin family.
If you don't know, alcohol has become a tremendous problem in American history. Alcohol was a money-making product. It was used as money. If you're living here, you can't take products until you get the railroad or the steamboat. You can't take them to market in bulk quantities. How can you take 400,000 pounds of corn to market? You can't. But you can reduce it down to kegs, strap it on a mule, and you can take it about anywhere and make a lot more money. People drank, and they drank a lot. We don't even have an American Revolution if it's not for rum. When the British closed the port of Boston, all the men were out of work, and they went to the taverns and got drunk. And they listened to Sam Adams, who they didn't like. And drunk, he started making sense. By the time we get to the 1840s in American history, there's something going on that's called the Second Great Awakening. And the Methodist Church is part of that. And the Second Great Awakening has to do a great deal with social issues. It has to do with faith also, but it has to do with social issues, like they're for women's right to vote. They're for temperance. They're for doing away with slavery. Things of that nature. A lot of them dropped out of society. You all are old enough to remember the hippies, but in the 1840s, you had the transcendentalists. They were just hippies too. They just dropped out for a different reason. Here in front of this church, the Sons of Temperance have a meeting. And a lady is writing to the editor that she did not expect much out of young men dealing with temperance, but that she was pleasantly surprised at the gathering. They presented to the stand, which had been erected in a beautiful grove near Beth Church, and after the meeting was opened by a very appropriate prayer from their chaplain. The crowd was well entertained by the speeches of Dr. Miller, Dr. Ferris, I.W.R. Franklin, and Mr. Whaley, all of whom seemed well equipped to the task at hand. People came from Morristown, Knoxville, and Danridge to this temperance meeting. So we have quite a gathering. No railroad then. If you're going to get here, you've got to get by horse and carriage. In 1879, we have another temperance movement here. The International Organization of Good Templars. Those of you that read Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code might wonder what happened to the Templars. They came to Leadvale. Not sure I can read this, but it reads better than I can
Show
tell
them
you.
the picture, Silas McGuire.
Can't get two things at once. Not moving. No, it's not moving.
Yeah. Click on in the square, yeah. There. He's there. I don't know why it's not showing on your screen. It's showing on. Oh. You went one past it. Let me read it.
Here's a picture of some Templars.
This one is Agnes LaRue's grandfather. That's Silas McGuire. Agnes LaRue taught school here, so all the locals know it.
In April 14th, 1879, we have a temperance movement here. $1,500 people attend. You could ride the train from Morristown to Leadvale and back for 35 cents. You had to sit on an open car. The procession was a mile long coming up to the church. They were led by the Leadvale Band. It was a string band on wheels with horses flagged and rigged off in good style. The procession was at least a mile in length. We were played to the ground where we found stands and seats nicely arranged in the most pleasant grove in the front of Beth Church. The exercises were opened with the reading of Scripture and prayer. By the Reverend W.H. Smith. Address of welcome was by J.C. Hodge, Esquire, and later by D.H. Meeks of Danbridge. Next came an able speech from a distinguished friend, the Major W.W. Langhorne from Newport, who was well prepared for the occasion. His speech was applauded, and to say that he did the temperance question justice would be a feeble expression. He urged the members to be earnest and faithful in the discharge of their duty. Next, our own Captain Hodge was introduced as the speaker. He made some well-timed remarks. His speech was directed to the young men who were urged to take their stand on the side of temperance. And then they have lunch. What he says they have is ham, turkey, chicken, together with substantial substance of life, the great delicious cake, yellow bread, all kinds of vegetables. And when it was over, they said they had 12 baskets biblically left over to give to the poor. So if you can imagine, 1,500 people sitting out in front of the church, probably in that grove that goes down to the railroad track. That's 1879. I told you we had a murder in 1891. This is 1854. This makes news all over the United States. It makes news in Europe. And this comes from a newspaper. I believe this one is it's the Liberator, Boston, Massachusetts. The deplorable scene of horror which has occurred in this county within the last week are peculiarly thrilling and strike every heart with a string of regret, which begs description. On last Wednesday night, Elijah Moore, his wife and sister-in-law were enjoying at home that joy and pleasure which alone could be realized in the calm repose in their own domicile. A servant of said Moore stole quietly into the room in which they were sleeping and without provocation murdered Moore with an axe. Miss Moore, being awakened by the blow upon her husband, entreated him to desist, and for this kind of entry from the indignant mistress, he failed her to the floor and murdered her with the same axe. The scene thus perpetrated aroused Miss Lotspeech, the sister-in-law of Mrs. Moore, a young lady of fine family and exceptional character, who ran to the bed where her sister and brother-in-law were being murdered in their own blood, but the horror of the picture before her overawed her, and she sprang back to her own bed. The fiend, with hellish purpose, approached her, and after a violent struggle between them, in which he broke her left arm, bruised her left shoulder, throat, chin, and severely, he finally accomplished his hell-born purpose and took her innocent life. Thus, by the hand of a furious slave who had never been wronged, but too kindly treated, 3 valuable lives of our most respected and highly esteemed citizens have been taken and rushed without previous notice into the presence of the ruler of the universe. I learned they were exceptional members of the Methodist Episcopal Church. The fear of our people was intense and had no bounds. A large number assembled and began a vigilant and thorough search for this hardened wretch. And on the last Sabbath at 12 o'clock, he was arrested. On the day following, he suffered at the stake by torch, that penalty which his infamy deserved, and was burned to the death at 1 o'clock, with a few hundred yards of the place where the murderer was committed. So they take him back to the house and hold him there, and then they take him outside and they burn him at the stake. But the better story, and I'll paraphrase this because it's also in the Franklin Diaries. It's not correct what they write, but the story is still there. Is after the murder, he gets in a canoe and he floats down the river. They eventually find him and shoot him. He's shot in the arm. They bring him back to the Franklin house for a hasty trial. He won't say anything, so they bring out a vice and they put his fingers in the vice and they crush his fingers. They then crush his arms. And then the article says, and remember this is in the Boston Liberator, they put his unmentionables in the vice and he commits to the verdict of guilty. 1,500 people come to the burning. And what's also interesting, the article says this is the 4th time in the county that a lynching has had to take place. So there's 3 others that happened somewhere, which I don't know what they are. But Kind of interesting. This story makes news all over the world. 1854. Now, just a few things in conclusion about White Pine. Or no, I'm sorry, White Pine, about Leadvale.
Right,
We have a Masonic Lodge, Leadvale School. This was C.E. Dunn, the one I told you that got murdered. This is Elijah Moore. We have another school we found here in Leadvale. Has anybody ever heard of the Oak Hill School? We hadn't found anybody that knows either. It is run by George T. Russell, and it's located somewhere within walking distance of the railroad in a Pleasant Vale. It is started, we think, in 1874. At least that's the first reference that I can find in a newspaper. In 1876, this article appeared. Nowhere in East Tennessee is there a clustering of more beautiful scenery than around this place, Oak Hill School, in charge of Professor G.T. Russell. It's located in a quiet little valley, a place that is as lovely for a home and heart could want for. It is only a step from the railroad, but no mountain cove is disturbed by the noise of a bustling world. To a visitor, the closing exercise of this school, which came off yesterday, were an oasis of the weary way of everyday life. Professor Russell is a born teacher. The examination of the class indicates thoroughness. The awarding of prizes was enjoyed by a packed house and by the unsuccessful competitors, as well as the more favored ones who were the recipients. Milton's works were avoided as a prize for the best composition. That went to Sarah Mims. If you don't remember, Mims is the station master at the railroad. Miss Lucy Moore received a fine and costly gold medallion. Now, Lucy Moore was W.A. Moore's daughter, and that's the big house going across Walters Bridge. The interesting thing about the medal is that the medals were produced here in Leadvale by a Mr. Salvo, S-A-L-V-O, and they were supposed to be exceptionally done. He is also an extremely good musician and speaker, and in the article they quote part of a speech that he makes. In 1877, the Oak Hill School goes up for sale. Evidently no one bought it, because it opens up again the next year in 1878, and is going to operate for another couple of years. So then we don't know what happened to it, and we can't find George Russell anywhere. But it had a very high reputation. Not that it means anything at all, but it was just interesting that there's a new post office established in 1855 between here and Bean Station, and it was called Texana. What a name for a post office in East Tennessee, Texana. C.D. Price is the postmaster. Price is a sober, upright, and reliable man. And we hope now to have orders for the best know-nothing and temperance paper in Tennessee. You know who the know-nothings were? asked them a question. They said, I know nothing. They were against immigration. Like everybody wanted an immigrant then. In 1873, an accident on the CCG&C Railroad. A colored man named Jesse Ray, known in this area, was very seriously hurt, if not fatally. He was standing on the platform of the coach between Rankin Depot and Leadvale. His hat blew off. In an effort to regain it, he jumped or fell from the train, which was coming across at an unusual speed. The conductor, as soon as possible, stopped the train, returned to where the event had happened. Ray was found in the stock pen, his forehead cut badly, his breastbone and shoulder bruised. He was taken onto the train to Leadvale, where he was cared for by friends. His recovery is doubtful. A Sunday school picnic is given in 1880 at Leadvale. The public is invited. Anyone living on the Buncombe Railroad, and that's what this was called sometimes, the Buncombe Railroad. The reason I read you this comment is the Morristown Silver Cornet Band and the Leadvale Brass Band will finish the music. Where does Leadvale get all of these bands? Does Leadvale have a band today? In 1902, a very serious accident occurred on Friday morning last week at the Leadvale Railroad Bridge on the North Carolina Division of the Southern Railway, 12 miles outside the city, which is Morristown. Two young brothers by the name of Smith were working and repairing the abutment of the south end of the Leadvale Bridge when a section of the track, which was being raised, broke loose and fell on them. One was killed instantly, the other had his thigh broken in two places, ribs broken. He was brought to Morristown, hopefully recover. Then we have a W.W. Patterson, who was killed near Leadvale yesterday, in an account of which appears in the telegraphic column. Patterson was 43 years of age. Until 2 weeks ago, he was a resident of this city, that was Knoxville. At that time, he removed to Leadvale. At 1 a.m. Friday morning, he was crossing the Leadvale Bridge when he was struck by a passing freight train, cutting him in half. How many of you walked across the Leadvale Bridge? Well, me too. It's not a real pleasant experience, is it? Or I didn't think it was when I was 11 years old. I'm not sure there were any more fish on the other side than there was on this side.
You thought you could catch more.
But you thought you could, yes. And I knew that train was coming the whole time I was walking across it. I knew it was.
Sure was.
It probably was. And I don't know what would have happened if it actually had. In December 6, 1917, they double-tracked the railroad. So it has two tracks going from Morristown across into the Carolinas. It cost $5 million to do that. In April 24, they build the cutoff that goes to Bull's Gap. And then in 40, we have an accident where two trains hit one another, somewhat like the Newmarket train wreck. These two trains were not passenger trains. One of the engineers and firemen, they see what's about to happen. They jump out just before the train hit, and they survive, and the other two were both killed. So that's one of those pictures that was there. The other thing is kind of unusual, and I don't know exactly how this happened, but Grover Cleveland's going on a goodwill tour around America. If you don't know, Grover Cleveland served 2 terms separated. He's also married a young girl. I think she's 24 years old and gorgeous. And his age convinced him he needs to go on a goodwill tour. So the Pullman car company puts together a train, and he goes around America. And as he's coming home, he goes through Asheville, comes down the French Broad, through Leadvale, and I have a little note from Mrs. Virginia Harrison's grandmother where she wanted to go see the train, and her dad wouldn't let her. But he doesn't, if he stopped, he probably didn't come out anyway. The train might have stopped, but it was already announced that he was not making any more public appearances after Asheville. So they head on into Washington, D.C. from there. The last, thank goodness. A man unknowingly appeared at the door of Miss Henry Wigington near Leadvale Monday of last week without clothing of any description and frightened Miss Wigington away. He proceeded to pile all her belongings in the middle of the floor and in the yard, preparing to carry off what he wanted with the aid of a companion. The lady's scream and alarm given by neighbors, however, prevented them from taking anything but flour and some cold victuals. Some officer of the law will scout for the freebooters who are not crazy but crafty. All right. We thought this was going to last 20 minutes, and we had to cut it down to even that. So, if you have something you'd like to ask before we adjourn and go to our homes, if you have a question, we might be able to answer it. We probably can't, but we'll try.
What year was the flood that hit Leadvale that raised the French Broad 14 feet? What year?
1892. January of 1892.
And is Leadvale, is that what became White Pine, or?
No, it has nothing.
It's still separated?
No. Leadvale had been here for 40, no, it had been here longer than that. A long time before White Pine came. White Pine doesn't come into existence until the railroad is built in 68. And then it's still going to take it a little time. They got to get a post office. So it's going to be, I believe, 72 when it actually has a post office called White Pine.
But Leadvale doesn't have a post office.
Yes, Leadvale's had a post office for years and years. Dale had a list of all the postmen.
Yeah, White Pine became a town because it was the Dandridge depot. Because Dandridge didn't have the railroad.
Right.
And Dandridge people had to come up. So basically we had the depot for the county seat. So people started setting up businesses. But this had been a plantation area and became a farming community as the plantations were divided and had its own stores. In 1942, Leadvale had 2 grocery stores.
So Leadville is a town with a post office.
It was never
It's not a town.
incorporated as a town,
It's a
but it
settlement.
did have a post office.
And it still does?
Not now.
Not now, uh-huh.
Yes. There's some pretty good maps of Leadvale on the Douglas land acquisition maps, TVA land acquisition maps. All the buildings and everything are on it.
I haven't got a chance to study those good. I do have them.
Yeah.
I have them all and they're very interesting,
Yeah.
but it's gonna take me a little time to process.
And Doc, Harry Helm, you said was launched at Hayes Ferry. Does that mean that ship was constructed in Jefferson County?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we know anything about where they were building boats like that in Jefferson County?
As far as I know, that's probably the only one built in the county.
Yeah.
Over on the other side of the river, they built one called the telephone and,
You have a picture of that in your book.
yes.
That's in this county too? Was built here?
I think it was, I think it's over closer to the Pigeon when they built it.
Okay.
They need to get down there a little bit deeper water to launch all these things.
I'm just really curious where these manufacturing plants were. It must have been a pretty pretty sizable plant.
If I'm not mistaken, the article that Newman wrote in 25, or is an interview, I believe it says something about where they weren't building those. They built like 6 shallow draft boats. But almost all of them are exclusively Knoxville to Dandridge. And they had regular routes to there. And then in the spring, probably they could come up to Leadvale when the water was higher. We were told, well, I was told one time by a University of Tennessee professor that was doing a class in steamboats, he said they never came above Dandridge, but.
No, I've read that occasionally they make them do.
Yes, Will Indictment says that they make there a couple times. But it really surprised me to have one say they went up to Novichok. But said it went way up to Novichok too. It wasn't just like it went up to the mountain. It went on up the river. But if you're only pulling two feet of water, a good rain gives you 2 feet of water.
Yeah, I've been up to Novichok with my depth finder on, and you can go pretty good way.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to present a check to the White Pine Historical Committee and their efforts to educate us and bring such a fantastic program to our area here.
We'll give it 2 hours later.
If nobody has any comments or questions, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you. We'll see you in, at the